I was maybe 9 and my first experience on the platform was a graphic sexually violent scene where the victim was and proceeded to get and I at the time didn't even know what sex was. My inaugural foray of sorts into Wattpad was sexually enlightening and by no exaggeration traumatic. Fast forward about a decade later and the platform, what it looks like today that is, has evolved or rather devolved in my opinion to something quite unrecognizable. Armed with a studio division, licensed fan fiction adaptations, and the faint veneer of regulation, the platform truly seemed poised for success. Approximately 17 million users have abandoned ship since its 2018 zenith. Her parent company, Naver Corporation's own begrudgingly publicized data. Revenue projections? Down an incredible $16 million since 2022. The million dollar or I don't know, the $16 million question is why? How did a once thriving community devolve effectively into a trope factory? I want to address the complexion of Wattpad in its current state. That is what it looks like today. And for the uninitiated or rather blissfully ignorant, Wattpad today bears indistinct resemblance to its humble origins. And I feel like I have every right to make that comparison because I was there for its humble origins. I genuinely remember what it used to be and I miss it. It used to be the simple bright orange logo app with no pretense. It is now an aggressively monetized machine, hawking premium subscriptions, coin-based paywalls, and Wattpad originals with all the shamelessness and no subtlety. Many disillusioned users like myself have taken to Reddit for catharsis, and I'm gonna read you some gems. I am sick and tired of Wattpad pushing this premium shit. The coins, the Wattpad originals. They posted a video on their YouTube account and I left them a comment telling them that they need to consider more centers and promote them and their writers, not just the very crappy and very unoriginal quote originals that they've got. It's stale, it's bland, it's repetitive. Why not advertise a book that doesn't have the toxic alpha male CEO, mafia boss, bad guy, ex-sweet, shy, nice girl types? There is more than that. And their requirements for a quote original story are very unfair for everyone else. Not everyone likes supernatural toxic romances. Some of us like short, sweet, cozy stories that are inspired by Bridgerton or epic tales inspired by Game of Thrones. To which I say, preach. Look, I totally agree, but let's not ingratiate a few disgruntled Redditors. Let's not even pander to my own frustrations. The hard pill, even for me to swallow as I was doing research for this video, is that over 70% of its consumer base remains to be women. We can complain all we want about the quality of the bait, but we are still biting and we are still poisoning ourselves. I know you know these tropes, say them with me, you know, the toxic alpha male, the brooding vampire, the emotionally constipated billionaire. What is it about these paradigms that have such severe psychosexual utility? Consider Wattpad's crown jewels: After, The Kissing Booth, My Life with the Walter Boys. All of these narrative renditions began as Wattpad stories and all of them are targeting, surprise, a predominantly female demographic. And I do believe that there is a reasonable interrogation to be made for these indulgences.
Guys, when you actually deep it, the Wattpad era was very scary. Because why was I reading dirty, filthy smut written by a bunch of 16-year-olds? And why did 98% of those books normalize emotional abuse, angry white boys, and unnatural amounts of sexual intercourse amongst teenagers? Oh, there's a lot going on in that era.
If you think that this is all about the female gaze, then I'm so sorry to tell you that you are underestimating the severe headache that we are dealing with here. This is the immature female gaze, bargaining in real time with its owner's fantasy to be so pervasively desired across every man's ideal, across every man's sycophancy that she essentially becomes a deity. These books turned franchises were written at 13, 14, except for maybe After, and that is a concern for another video. But years later, you know, in their early 20s, these women were essentially handed multi-million-dollar deals to turn their pubescent fantasies into into global franchises. I've always tried to make my opinion on the extremized female gaze quite explicit in most of my videos if you have been watching them. But to summarize my concerns, I find it to be incredibly reductive of the male personality. I find it to be insultingly flattening of their sexual complexity, and more often than not, I find it to be rather abusive of the quote feisty female personality, whose backbone, to be quite honest, is the most selectively insufferable thing I've had to put up with in a long time. But you know, I can gripe, I can complain. I'm getting incredibly good at that. At the end of the day, I cannot deny that Wattpad provided a truly invaluable service for aspiring writers, not just female writers, but young writers in general. And there are so few of us. It is such a small niche, and it is so hard for us to find each other anyway. Young girls, teenagers, prepubescents who have been writing and reading obsessively ever since they realized the escapist utility of a story written well, of a story, usually, at least for me, it'll be a fantasy so detached from reality yet addressing of reality's pains that somehow, some way, this far off political fantasy contextualizes my reality. Not just girls, but young aspiring writers. Even though from the beginning the demographic was majority female, but these young authors with Google Drives and repositories of drafts from the time that they were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And because it is such a niche interest, it tends to be very, very isolating, because if you read a lot, if you write a lot, especially that obsessively, gosh, you'll find that it bleeds off hours from your day. And it is an effort you are more than willing to put your blood, sweat, and tears into, because it is that fulfilling. I think anybody with a passion, whether it be writing, whether it be sports, whether it be art, whether it be music, whether it be coding, once you understand that you have a passion, it doesn't matter how much time that you dedicate to it, it doesn't matter how much sweat, how much time you find yourself just by yourself in your craft. It is so fulfilling. But you often don't have a community, you don't have beta readers, you can't have feedback, and so you don't get better. Wattpad honestly did fill that gap for a lot of us, but there are also a lot of other valid needs and niches that Wattpad service. An unfortunate misconception I do get from a lot of men, unfortunately, when I express to them that I love reading, I love writing, and a lot of other women have expressed to me that they often do get the same response from men, especially so men who hate reading, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing with not liking reading, but I just want to clear this up for everybody involved without, you know, taking any unnecessary offense, because I am not necessarily offended. I just feel it important, you know, to address. The female reading demographic isn't as narrow in the interest represented on a commercial scale, that is, as a platform like Wattpad advertises. Although the toxic alpha male, you know, the sexually frustrated vampire, the man-child billionaire, sometimes the surgeon, the alpha werewolf who is frightening and murderous in every way at the same time, right, these archetypes service the psychosexual reprieve for a very significant audience demographic. They didn't do that for all of us. As you might be coming to realize if you've watched any of my earlier videos, it didn't do that for me, and I appreciate that I'm definitely not the only one. It didn't do that for a lot of women. Quite frankly, it never did that for me, and it's completely okay if those are the archetypes that scratch the itch for you. What I'm trying to say is we are all individuals and we all like and enjoy different things. We need not be, I think, characterized into certain indulgences of expectation just because, you know, a girl tells you, oh, I love reading romance. It doesn't necessarily mean what you think it does, you know, all the time. Anyway, it's not a big deal. I just wanted to put that conversation to bed. But from the perspective of a straight woman, I'm going to try to diagnose the origins of the more toxic attachments for anybody who is curious about what might inform these niche indulgences, especially so at such a young age. What we often see in girls at the cusp of puberty, boys too, but I am specifically addressing the woman here. What we often see in girls at the cusp of puberty is an interrogation of their sexual interest and a hardening of their future ideals, especially when it comes to men. The universal consistencies in the toxic archetype that I will outline are absolutely not coincidental. And in my personal opinion, they directly describe something quite inveterate in women, something that we find security within, and I'm going to make that thing quite explicit by the end of this description. The first consistency is that the male love interest is almost always older. And so for a girl within that age range, 13 to 18, maturing faster than the boys within her age group, somebody older is unique. And that is simply because, and I can definitely make some relatability to my personal experience, the margin of relatability is wider. The margin of familiarity is wider, and so increases the potential to bond. The hard reality to accept, especially speaking to myself and speaking to my own experiences, is immature boys feel like children. And I'm personally more overwhelmed or inclined to protect when I'm confronted with the unhinged unpredictabilities of a child than I ever would be attracted to them. But the unhinged unpredictabilities of a man, well, that is different. It is not healthy, it is toxic, and I'll tell you why. It is different because when you are so confident in your recklessness, and as is consistent in these trope-suffocated stories, not only that, but you almost certainly always get away with that recklessness for an interpretive framework that is so immature, that is so naive, that is so vulnerable in a young girl, this unhinged unpredictability becomes the ideal. And I'm going to try to explain to you why. She interprets this guy's recklessness through her immature framework, and especially so if he always gets away with it, as this guy having exceptional strategy and competence in navigating himself throughout the world. Hear me loud and clear when I say this. It is a lie. It is a manipulation of what ideals you are in the middle of trying to harden for yourself. And even if you're a young girl watching this and you don't quite understand why this is such a lie, such a delusion, I'm asking you very nicely, for the sake of yourself, for the sake of the immature young boy who is also just trying to figure himself out, I'm telling you nicely that in order to preserve everybody involved, you need to scrub it from your system because it is dangerous. You are unfortunately being trained and taught to excuse the behaviors, much worse actually, to become attracted to the behaviors of a restless boy in a man's body, and you have absolutely no business being on the receiving end of that. You also have no business being on the receiving end of a resentment that absolutely will come from his end, because men are not stupid and he will figure out when you are trying to fix him. They are people, they are human beings, they don't like being molded into some ideal version of your own fantasy. This is not just true of men, this is true of human beings. We don't like being forced into caste that we have not consented to being, not consented to being forced into. It is not a male thing, it is a human thing, and we need to honor other people's humanity. There is a reason that these toxic alpha male stereotypes are literally impossible for a real man to embody in the real world. We shouldn't expect our men to embody them either, but the thing about these books is that they tend to be female self-inserts, and they're so cathartic because the woman reading the work, actually even worse, the woman writing the work sees herself in the character. And so yes, they tend to be quite insufferable. Yes, they tend to be incredibly unrealistic, but it is diagnostic to me of an immature female mindset, which is why it becomes quite concerning when I see adult women writing stories like this. I feel a lot of ways about it. Anyway, at the end of the day, even in the reverse, which we should address in another video, men writing women, because that is a can of worms I would love to get into. Either way, on either end of the extreme, I just believe that it is so crucial that we preserve the development of everybody involved. I personally think, as much as I enjoy books and narratives from either end, when it becomes extreme, again, on either end, it is just deepening our uncured animosity towards each other. Anyway, turning to Wattpad, it is crucial to note the platform's ability to cater to a myriad of niches upon its inception. It also serviced writers from those distinct niches of interest who wanted to find communities and places of feedback and audiences for their work, ways to connect with other people who had that distinct that distinct interest, that distinct niche, rather, I think more deeply craved for that distinct escapism. Because more often than not, when you can find that relatability with someone, the realities that you are escaping from through fiction tend to be quite similar, and they find themselves being quite intimate points of discussion, quite intimate points of bonding. Speaking to my own experience, I found it to be such a strain to find people my age who were genuinely interested in political science fiction, high fantasy, even spy thrillers. And you know what? It was similarly difficult for girls who wanted Harry Potter fanfics, Raylo fanfics. The niches were so distinct, even Twilight-inspired renditions of stories. Even though it wasn't my thing, it doesn't matter. It was somebody else's thing. And it served as somebody else's need to escape for hours on end. Sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes even days on end. Fan communities flourished for Twilight-inspired stories and serialized romances, each finding their own little refuge in this burgeoning literary ecosystem, which is something as a parallel concern that we need to address. Because why? I've been wondering this for a while actually. Why is it that we needed to escape for hours at a time in these books? I don't know. I feel like there's something we need to talk about there, but that's a video for another day. Anyway, Wattpad did occupy a few darker niches that weren't regulated, especially at its inception. Undeniably, an older community of women who I think need a bit of help, who find something not just acceptable, not just excusable, but to be idealized about the more explicitly abusive, sexually violent, and graphic renditions of their favorite stories. The darker, unregulated corners of Wattpad must be acknowledged, and early on, the platform became a repository of all content. Graphic, inappropriate, and at times, like I said in the beginning of this video, traumatic. I think a lot of young girls, specifically in the very beginning of Wattpad, were traumatized, naively exposed to content that they were not looking for. My English teacher back in prep school recommended Wattpad to me because I had nothing to read and I'd exhausted all of the books, I'd exhausted all of the books from our library. And so I downloaded it and started reading the first book that I found. It was obviously something to do with, magical realism, fantasy, because that is what I wanted. The cover was the most innocuous thing. Anyway, 2 chapters in and I come across this scene. You guys, it was so out of nowhere. I can't even describe it to you because it was so graphic. But I remember that moment like it was yesterday. And it is, I'm not even exaggerating. It is the only moment in my life that I can recall my body physically responding to something that I'd seen with my eyes. I had chills. I had a fever the entire day. Guys, like, I was ill. I didn't even know what was wrong with me, but it was really bad. I've never been made that. So I've spoken about it before on this channel, and I struggle a lot with sleep, and that period of time was the first recollection I have with struggling so badly with sleep for at least 2 days after reading that scene. Obviously it was not consensual. It was a scene. I did not sleep for at least a good 2 days afterwards because I was so ill. It was sickening. It took me a long time to even, reckon with that story because it is such a, I know it's not, but to me, the way I interpret it is it feels like a really stupid thing to be traumatized by. It really does. But I can't lie to myself and say that did not affect me because it did. This is where I'm honestly so grateful for accessible parents, because this is not the kind of feeling you want a child to internalize for a long time because they feel such crippling shame and they're too afraid to come to their parents. This is exactly the kind of thing that you need an adult to guide you through and talk you through in a healthy way. Yeah, really grateful for my mom. I don't know what I would have done without her. Anyway, that entire story is just to say that content wasn't something I was looking for at the time. It It wasn't, even if it was consensual, it was too much for any child. And this just speaks to the extremity of niche and interest that Wattpad was servicing at the time, without regulation and, unfortunately, without content warnings. Wattpad essentially became a free-for-all repository for anybody and everybody's interests. And with a saturation of interest, you have competition. As Wattpad really pursued a mass market appeal, I think it abandoned the ethos that made it special. These monetized paywalls and formulaic quote-unquote Wattpad originals truly did alienate a lot of smaller niche demographics. Like that user on Reddit articulated so well and made so explicit, some of us genuinely did and still remain to really enjoy narratives that don't have romance. Yes, those used to exist on Wattpad. Some of us wanted romance, but those that were genuine and where the integrity of both romantic parties was maintained, however that looked like, and that it was just cute and adorable and I don't know, just wholesome, just a good time. There are some readers who just want to see a hopeful, good story. Some readers just want to feel. In some romances, in some stories, I will expose myself right now. We are here for the cringe. We just want to feel the butterflies. We just want to read something wholesome. We just want to read something happy and hopeful. And it doesn't have to necessarily be, sexually charged. Sometimes it really is just about feeling the butterflies without orgasm. And if you do want that, fine. That is perfectly fine. But should that be all that is offered? I don't think so. I don't think that is fair. Communities on Wattpad effectively splintered, and the platform that once celebrated creativity now feels more like a factory assembly line, churning out romance cliches for Netflix adaptations. But I, as an adult now, actually have to actually stop myself from being too emotionally concerned with this, because at the end of the day, Wattpad's transformation is not personal, it's business. Romance remains the most lucrative literary genre, and the platform's pivot towards profitability is, from a corporate standpoint, completely rational. It needs to service interests in niches that are within the majority's interest, and at the end of the day, these Netflix originals, whether you like them, whether you love them, whatever it is you think about them, they are selling. But to end things off, and in my opinion, in Wattpad's quest for commercial success, it sacrificed the communal intimacy that once defined it. So, to answer the question, the title of today's video, what exactly happened to Wattpad? The same thing that happens to any cultural phenomenon that overextends itself. It burns. Not even in a blaze of glory, but under the slow, smoldering collapse, suffocated under the weight of its own mediocrity. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, whether you are a writer, whether you know of Wattpad, whether you don't know of Wattpad, I don't care. I would love to know your thoughts, I would love to know your comments, but I'll see you soon. You take care, and goodbye.